Be chill, Cecil. This is Cecil. I hope you are having a fantastic time. These are Marvel superheroes. Let's talk about them. Want a little thought experiment? Imagine when all the Marvel Universe was just a mirthful pop culture fad found in magazines with monsters and weird stories, found on something called a spinner rack, if you know what that is. Something you used to find in the convenience store, or a magazine rack like you find at the grocery store, pharmacies, produce markets, newsstands. This is where you'd find them, represented here by this handful of new heroes. They're hand-drawn figures, colored and lettered by often uncredited hands, across storytelling pages of magazines expected to mostly be quickly read, traded, and trashed, might be around a year or so tops. Imagine looking at them and thinking the first thoughts of who these characters might be and what to do with them. Can you see them with fresh eyes? Sure, there's some really old ideas already in there, starting with this newly designed super being Thor, who's based on the Norse god of thunder. Johnny Storm of the Fantastic Four. He's the latest teenager version of the Human Torch, who was created by Carl Burgos in 1939 for Marvel Comics #1. And 3 all-new creations here. An astonishing Ant-Man, who's Hank Pym, a scientist in a costume dug out of Marvel's monster magazines. The newly golden Iron Man, and the teen star who premiered the same month as Mighty Thor, the mysterious yet colorful Spider-Man. 7 months after his origin, Marvel's just published the first 2 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man. This was Marvel's superhero lineup in spring 1963, 60 years before this video was made. Most of these characters debuted in titles that featured monsters, aliens, and the outer limits of the Twilight Zone now for years. They would cause an excitement that would bring characters of racial diversity and sexual equality to gradually arrive, spurred by young creators who wish to reflect the changing values of their times. Imagine, within months of the bi-monthly Fantastic Four's success, according to the new comics trend in superheroes, editor Stan Lee determined to develop the gamma-irradiated behemoth Hulk. But by spring of 1963, the Incredible Hulk finished his 6-issue solo title. That's why you don't see him in this advertisement. But he would surface as a guest star in the first Marvel Comics crossover in Fantastic Four #12. With Hulk, the concept changed radically each of those 6 issues, influenced by artists Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, whose fertile imaginations brought ideas and craft to editor Stan Lee's creative superhero gambit. While this Hulk didn't quite gel consistently, in spring of 1962, both Thor and Spider-Man premiered, under covers with pull dates of August. That's a lot of comic book jargon there to say. See there on the cover date, they always have an abbreviation for a month, and that is the month that the store will take the comic book off the shelf. You know, it's August, now it's September. We can take these out of the way if there's any left, and that's the way things used to work. So that's really probably the equivalent of about, I'm going to guess, about April or May of 1962. And this was the month that Marvel tested doubling down on the superhero trend. Now think, you add the Hulk and Marvel's second woman in costume, the Wasp, who joins Hank Pym in Tales to Astonish #44. And in spring of 1963, you have just the first 10 Marvel superheroes. Just 10. You could count them on both hands. So you had the Submariner, but this returned Bill Everett creation from the Timely Comics era was definitely an antagonist and a likely suitor for Sue Storm of the Fantastic Four. At this point, the first female superhero at Marvel is still merely invisible, and attitudes about girls had a lot of stereotypes left to break. Imagine if Reed had crafted her even a single device. But But in the first couple of years, Susan Storm also creates her first invisible shields, and along with her other aspects of resourcefulness, grows into a very powerful superhero in her own right. But this is March of 1963. This is still just a few short weeks before the debut of the X-Men, the first mutant-themed superheroes. In backup stories published years later, they are portrayed as meeting and forming their first Xavier Academy class behind the scenes during these early Marvel stories, contemporarily. The Human Torch seems like the likely fan favorite, so his small-town adventures star in strange tales, starting with issue number 101, about the time of the return of Prince Namor, who was a staple in the company's earlier incarnation, and about the time of the debut of Doctor Doom. This newly minted arch-rival to the Fantastic Four menaces the Wallcrawler and Flash Thompson, his bully, in Amazing Spider-Man number 5, an early villain crossover. 1963 was the year this primordial Marvel Comics thing began its shared world. This was followed by the recruitment of scientist Hank Pym to reconnect with the miniature world of the ants. And while it's pretty batshit fun, it's hard to provide him with sensible challenges and drama. One gets the idea that comics are aimed at readers with a less sophisticated idea of romantic experience as well, and at least what adults thought kids thought. Apparently, one thing kids thought was the original Fantastic Car in issue 3 looks a bit like a bathtub. So this is around the time Johnny is said to redesign their signature craft. Thanks, Jack Kirby. This is the era of the first meetings, the first enduring villains, and the first redesigns. Spider-Man's costume is purple with blue highlights, plus its enduring red with webbed armpits. The Vulture had tail feathers. And Iron Man, front and center here in his very first redesign, is the lead in his third or fourth adventure in the double feature Tales of Suspense. Imagine his bulky suit, earthbound. He's getting around with air jets, roller skates, and other wheeled arrays, and somehow holds his own against aliens, the robots they send, and catches the eye of Queen Cleopatra while he's time traveling. Now, about the time of this advertisement, his foe was a science-oriented villain in Tales of Suspense issue number 41, and his name was Doctor Strange, who challenges and evades Tony Stark in this single appearance. His moniker was better reserved for the character created by Steve Ditko, who grows into the mystic dual feature lead of Strange Tales. Imagine what it was like when these characters were, for one, not expected to endure more than a couple of seasons, nowhere near tied to the merchandising or Hollywood juggernauts of today, and were, in fact, incomplete concepts that Lee and company had only begun to fully envision. These one-day billion-dollar babies were roughly the value of modest paychecks. Lee farmed out a lot of the scripting of these titles, save for Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, to his brother, Larry Lieber, and for a time to Robert Bernstein, Jerry Siegel, and other blink-and-miss-them writers. We are still a ways from the time when Stan Lee is clearly committed to writing superheroes. Outside his window, the New World superpowers were studiously, bravely attempting the first moonshot. People did not need to be something so far-fetched as a mutant to be hated for being different, and teenagers were enjoying their newfound mobility and creating their own distinct counterculture. The excitement that these characters generate opened fantasies for new generations to follow, and more people found characters with whom they identify. In this world, Peter Parker beams his first spider signal, weaving his webs in clever new ways with each panel. Yet, Peter considers becoming a criminal with his newfound power. His showbiz career is newly awash, and he and his widowed Aunt May's problems present a cold splash of the real. Peter's still sure he can turn public opinion. Who will he be? There's still a danger in his frustration and cynicism, shared by characters like Ben Grimm, a.k.a. The Thing, or even the early Human Torch, Johnny Storm. And Peter Palmer here decides to visit the Baxter Building and audition of his own accord to join the Fantastic Four. He starts a ruckus. And the cover to Amazing Spider-Man 1 represents the other candidate for the first Marvel crossover, all in issue 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Most revolutionary in its storytelling engine, not only do the heroes share New York City, their story events are referenced and contextualized, seeming to fit together, as though this emerging tapestry of roughly hewn characters were one continuing story running in some order through each and every title. But in spring of 1963, most of the Marvel Universe remains untold.